Brian and I first met a few years ago. Brian is from National Instruments. And I always like to say that Brian, I actually got introduced to Brian, to National Instruments via Brian. I've known a few other people there, but I actually got into NI and took the tour via Brian, and they've got a great clean energy package for entrepreneurs, and that's how we first met. But he also invited me to my first NI week. Anybody been to NI week? It's in the summertime. It's a great week full of engineers, and it's right at the convention center. It's how many engineers have come?
About 4,000.
4,000 engineers have come to Austin for a week to talk engineering, geek talk. And I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to learn there. The cool thing was that Brian actually introduced a new line of panel discussions for NI 3 years ago, which was about energy and clean energy and how NI was going to get into that marketplace. So he's an innovator at NI. He's been there for a long time, and I appreciated that. And that's actually where I first heard Bob Metcalf speak. He was one of the speakers for that line of speaking, and before we knew he was actually going to come down and move to Austin. So that was a great relationship there. So without further ado, Brian.
Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, I probably should have listed Metcalf on my list of influences for this talk today, because I definitely think he's changed my thinking about energy, applying what we can learn from technology changes in IT to the energy space. And I think many of the same lessons apply. Energy is a very different beast. But from a technology standpoint, I'm going to go through today and take a look at some of the just Moore's Law type technology trends that I see having a big impact in the next decade on energy. And a lot of it is about the type of accelerating change that we saw in the IT industry applied to energy. And that's really exciting because energy is at the fundamental root of all business and of our economy. So I see this as perhaps a bigger impact on business in the world than the IT revolution. And in fact, it builds on the IT revolution, and it uses all that IT technology. As Mitch said, I'm definitely warmed up for you because I walked a long ways. I was thinking we were east side and we're west side. But that's good. I got my trail running shoes on. I have a really neat job at National Instruments as Clean Energy Product Manager. So my job is to work with companies around the world that are developing clean tech, and then engineers around the world at National Instruments that are working on various aspects of our products lines to create a better tool chain for clean energy. So how many of you folks in the room are business and on the non-technical side? How many of you are engineers or scientists? Okay, pretty even mix. And how many of you consider yourself both? Great. Good. Well, that gives me a feel for the room. Well, first of all, as an engineer or scientist, I really don't like the word predict because it's really impossible to predict the future. But what we can do is look at long trends that go back a long time in the past and be reasonably confident that they might continue into the future. And we can use those to forecast what things will look like in the years ahead. And that's what I'm going to do with you today. This is my job at National Instruments. I don't expect to go into all the details, but various aspects of the design of these digital energy systems involve everything from simulation on the desktop when the engineer's at the early stage of design, to tools to help them rapid prototype the systems, to high volume commercial deployment, and then real-time simulation tools that are critical for the design process so that we can validate the embedded systems before we deploy them. And this is standard practice in the automotive and aerospace industry for flight control systems and engine control units on cars, but it's been really missing in the energy space. And in my opinion, this is one of the gaps that's been holding up progress, because it's very hard to test a megawatt power converter that's from your solar farm that's putting power on the grid. You can't just short out the grid and open circuit the grid and cause faults and all these problems. But engineers really need to do that in a simulation sense. They really need to do that kind of validation and verification to find the needle in the haystack kind of problems. And so this is a critical technology where we're investing to make better tools to make it so you can do real-time simulations of like a solar inverter, and then all the way up to a microgrid, and eventually the entire power grid. You can run a simulated version. And once it's simulated, you can try all kinds of different things, and it really becomes an information technology. It becomes a software problem, and that's critical to getting a faster slope of improvement that we need to really do the innovation. So some of the products I work on, this product I'll pass around, is the general purpose inverter controller. And the goal here is working with National Renewable Energy Labs and the California Energy Commission to try to create a very low-cost standard embedded board for controlling the power conversion that goes on the grid. And I'll talk about what those converters look like. Another project we're doing right now is an open source design here. This is the guts of the power conversion equipment in a wind turbine or solar farm or electric vehicle. We're picking this particular circuit design because it shows up so many different places. And what we're doing is we're building it on a mini scale. So this will be designed for 48 volts. So everything's safe to touch for researchers or students. But Westinghouse and the guys in the power grid have been using mini scale systems to design the power grid for a long time. And one of the big reasons is because they didn't have digital simulators like this to do it. So the only way to do it was really to build a mini scale system. So we think there's a role for both the digital simulation and the physical mini prototypes. So I call this Lego bricks for the smart grid. The idea is that students and researchers can take lots of these, put them on a wall, and simulate the power flow between Houston and Dallas and Austin, and pull these plugs out, which are these nice removable plugs, and disconnect Houston from Dallas and reconnect it to Austin, and look at all the different software aspects of how they would design the system to be able to handle that. So hopefully that gives you a feel for some of the kind of tools and technologies that NI does. It has a lot to do with embedded systems. It has a lot to do with instrumentation and the whole design process. We're a tools provider. So our mission is to equip the engineers and scientists with tools that make them do their jobs better and more efficiently. We came out of a garage in Austin, so great startup success out of University of Texas. And you can see we've rebounded since the downturn, and we're right on track. We just passed $1 billion in revenue last year, 6,500 employees. And we're very, very diverse in terms of our portfolio. No industry is more than 15% of our revenue. And that's one of the ways we can weather the downturn, is when different industries go up and down, we're providing engineering tools to new ones that are bubbling up. Lots of engineers. We're really a company for and by engineers, all the way up to the top management. And large field sales, which are engineers as well, not doing research and development, but doing field sales around the world. So some of the questions I want to answer today in this talk is, one, is there enough renewable energy to serve global demands? Could renewable energy be the primary source of energy for the world? Will it be cheaper than coal? If we look at these technology trends and forecast forward and extrapolate. I drive an electric vehicle. I want to know whether that's going to be cheaper than a gas car someday. It's already cheaper to drive than a gas car. It just costs a little bit more up front. It's about 6.5 times cheaper per mile, even on Green Choice Energy in Austin. In fact, I can charge downtown like it's plugged in right now, $100 for a year of unlimited charging. So it's almost free. Can we make energy as cheap and dependable as internet bandwidth? This is really Metcalfe thinking here. Can we apply what happened in IT to energy, and what are the criteria to do that? And that's really what I'm trying to do with my job, is to make energy and information technology, make it a software problem, and make it, so we can build Lego bricks to design and prototype and deploy these systems on terawatt scales to meet world energy demand. So some of my influences, Ray Kurzweil and his models. He's a prolific inventor that's made his career in predicting when technology is going to bubble out. Invented optical character recognition and other things. Sornet's Why Stock Markets Crash, The Black Swan. Strogatz, what's interesting about him is he is a chaos scientist, but he shows that even in big chaotic systems that are very hard to predict, you have a lot of synchronization, a lot of positive feedback cycles. And so things tend to converge in certain behaviors. And then also the Stock Markets Crash book is also about big chaotic systems and how you can actually get orderly behavior if you look on a long enough time scale, and things like evolution and the evolution of technology. And then the time tree of life, I try to apply 11 evolutionary models to the way I model technology, because technology and evolution to me seem to be tied together completely. In fact, the way our hands evolved was to use stone tools, and our heads got big because women had slings so they could carry babies, so we're basically born immature now, and we can have a bigger brain size, and then we do more of our development outside of the sling. Like, technology and evolution have always been tied together. And I see a lot of the evolutionary models applying to how technology changes and the paradigm shifts. And I'll show you some of that. So some of the projections, I think, and then I'll try and show you the models that go with this. I think clean renewable energy will be 10 times cheaper than coal, at least as a minimum. Probably a lot cheaper than that. But I can point to technologies today already that will get us there. The countries that invest most aggressively in clean renewable energy will be the wealthiest and most stable countries in the world. And that's because energy and economic growth are so tied together. If you make energy cheap and abundant, the economy grows faster. It's kind of like and I always hear economists negating this and saying, well, at some point economies get developed enough and they just have enough energy and we don't need more. That's kind of like saying at some point computers get fast enough and we don't need more horsepower or computing power and we'll just have enough. And so far I haven't seen that happen in computers, and businesses and engineers and entrepreneurs find lots of ways to use it when you have more computing horsepower. And I think we'll find lots of ways to use abundant energy when we make it cheap and available. So I don't think by any means you can say adding more energy won't drive economic growth, and that's only true for developed nations. That's what I hear from economists sometimes. And smart grid technology, I believe, is going to allow us to handle 100% renewable energy, even given the fact that it's variable. That's really just a software problem. It's an engineering problem. How do you deal with that variability and balance supply and demand? How do you add in a bit more storage? That's an IT problem. We can solve it just as we solve the internet. How does the internet manage to stay online? We've never had a complete outage. Well, it was designed for that. It was designed to be robust and stable. And we needed to design an energy internet that's as robust and infallible as the internet. It should be war-proof. You shouldn't be able to take out the power grid on the East Coast of the United States and shut down business and it's costing billions of dollars a year. We can do that, and the technologies are available, and that's a lot of what I focus on, is to try and commercialize those. And electric vehicles will be cheaper and higher performance and more popular because they're going to be a lot more fun to drive and a lot higher performance than gas cars. So when I look at this as perhaps one of the biggest trends of our time. I call it the digital energy revolution. And we saw it in search. You know, nobody uses the Dewey Decimal Card Catalog system that I learned in school anymore to search at a library. I use Google. Once these things happen, they happen very fast. In 2010, Amazon sold more digital books than they sold print books. And I believe one of the next big technology revolutions that's going to happen is this digitization of energy. Energy is going to go digital. And that means digitally controlled, digitally manipulated, digitally stored, and we can pass it around the world with high efficiency. And the energy infrastructure is going to be a lot more robust. So what do we need to make this happen, and what do I believe are the criteria for this to occur? Well, one, it's got to be digitized and digitally controlled. It's got to be a computerized system. It's got to be networked. It's got to be field reconfigurable. It needs to be more of a software app than it is today. It can't be fixed hardware. You got to model and simulate it, and that's critical to the design. It's a big, nonlinear, poorly mathematically behaved system, and you really have to just use evolutionary and iterative optimization algorithms to try and find a way to solve it. And you can design the system to just be natively robust like the internet. And even though it's extremely complex, it can still be very reliable and robust. If you do all these things, it'll improve at exponential rates. If we make it an information technology, the slope changes. And we see that in so many different things as soon as they go digital. One of the forecasts along this line, just to give you a feel for the scale of this, is that today about 30% of all power goes through what's called power electronics, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. But it's digital control of power, basically breaking power and energy into packets and then moving them around under computer control. About 30% goes through it today. By 2030, it's expected that about 80% will go through power electronics before it gets used. So between the generation and the consumption. So what do we need to make this happen? What are the requirements? And then part of the case I'm trying to build is then we're going to look at the trends for each of these things, and you can make your own call on whether you think it's going to happen or not. Or you can debate me on whether I'm missing some big requirements. But I tend to look at things more from a technology point of view than a policy point of view. I think policy is primarily standing in the way of this. But what I'm most interested in, is it technically feasible? Because I think we can do it technically if it is. So we need abundant, clean, renewable energy. So the question is, do we have it? Is there enough of it? We need fast, real-time computing. So Moore's law is the mega trend behind all of this. We need lots of processing power to do this. We need low latency, high bandwidth networking, and latency meaning the time delay between things. I need to communicate quickly to be able to manage all these distributed energy resources on the grid. I need high efficiency power electronics transistors. And the good thing is these are trending towards 99% efficient, which means I can switch around 100 kilowatts of power and only lose 1 kilowatt in the process. So that's very low loss. Compare that with a combustion gas car. A combustion gas car is about 8% efficient. So you put $20 of gas in your car, and about 80 cents of that actually moves you down the road. and the rest is waste heat. Did I do the math on that right? 21, no, $1.60 moves you down the road. Sorry, I thought that didn't sound right. So most of the heat most of the energy is lost to heat, to waste heat. These transistors, these power electronics transistors are very efficient. And that's very helpful because it means there's not much penalty for us to manipulate the energy digitally. And then you need high accuracy A to D converters or analog to digital and sensors. So I need to be able to read the voltage and current and other things on the grid. I need cheap high density energy storage. And this is one of the toughest ones on this list and the one that's probably needs the biggest improvements of all these things. So let's look at some of these trends and see where we're at. So what I'll do is just take the 4 trends that go back many years and then try to project them forward into the future and see what how the world changes between 2000 and 2020 over a 20-year period. So Moore's law is just insanely incredible, 113,000 times cheaper per dollar. When I was born in 1975, it was about $16 to do 1 calculation a second, to buy a computer that could do 1 calculation a second. So you spend $100, you can get 100 times 16 calculations per second on your calculator. Today, it's about 280 million calculations a second per dollar on that board that I just passed around, on the FPGA chip that's on there. And so it's just incredible how that is going to change the world and how it enables us to do things. The thing to think about is, what can I do with $1 of computing? What does that enable me to do? So how much do I have to spend to predict the weather for a week? Or how much do I spend to, say, stabilize the power grid? Or how much do I have to spend to do real-time voice-to-text recognition? That's reaching the point now where it's done in the cloud. Pretty soon the computers will be fast enough you'll be able to do it in your hand, where you can speak at a normal speed and it'll be able to translate that to speech. So this has a huge impact on the practicality of applications and what we can solve at a cost-effective price. And because this revolution, this digital energy revolution, is all about digital and computing, this is a key one. Hard drive storage, off the charts. Wireless data traffic, all of our Wi-Fi links at home are exponentially faster than they used to be. Solar energy, this is a very conservative estimate based on like the 1990s to 2006 timeframe. We're actually beating this right now considerably. Power converter, that converter that I talked about, and 27 times more power for its size. So you think about the inverter that's in my Nissan Leaf, it's about that big. In 2000, it would have been a lot bigger, and in 2020, that same converter that does 80 kilowatts of power will be 27 times smaller than it was in the year 2000. So that opens up lots of applications. Lithium-ion batteries, 29 times more energy storage per dollar. That's a killer, because liquid fuel is just absolutely really tough to beat. And so we do need high density, low cost storage. And then the efficiency of the inverters by 2020 may be in the mid 99%. So that means like that 100,000 watt inverter on the car in the year 2000, if I had 3,000 to 4,000 watts of waste heat, that's a pretty big burner on your stove. 3 to 4 kilowatts of heat that I got to blow off with the fan. But if I can get that down to 500 watts, that's more like the heat coming out of my laptop. So that's a lot more manageable. So that opens up all kinds of new applications. And the thermal issue is one of the big issues in this power electronics and the digital control of this power right now. And then just I lose less energy as I do this manipulation. So there's less penalty for doing digital control. So those are some of the macro trends. Let's start and then go through and answer some of the other questions. Is there enough renewable energy to serve global demand? Well, human demand is 16 terawatts. And then let's look at some of the candidates. We got solar, wind, airborne wind, terrestrial wind, hydro, ocean thermal wave, geothermal, and tidal. Those are some of the best candidates, in my opinion, that can scale to meet global demand. So with solar, we've got about over 5,000 times more energy available than we need today. Airborne wind, 187 times with a conservative estimate. And I'll explain what airborne wind is in a minute. Terrestrial wind, those are the ground turbines that you all are familiar with. Hydropower, 19. Ocean thermal, 6. Wave, 4. Geothermal, 2. And tidal. So the bottom line here is there's a lot more energy than we ever envisioned needing in the next 20 years available from renewable energy. The question is, can we make it cheap enough and can we scale to meet all 16 terawatts? Can the technology scale up? So how many of you agree with this statement? Government shouldn't pick winners and losers. I hear this all the time. I want to disagree with you on that because I think government should pick winners. And I think as a society, as a government, we should be thinking about what are the technologies that actually can scale to meet our global demand, can be cost effective, and have all the benefits for society that we want. So I think this is kind of a scorecard that I always ask for any clean tech and evaluating whether we should invest in it. Can it be less expensive than fossil fuels? Can it provide civilization scale power levels? Does it have favorable energy payback ratio, which means like how much energy does it take to put it out there in the first place? Do I end up using more to get it out there? It may still be worth doing it, even if it takes more energy to create it in the first place. And can you produce it cleanly? Like if you're just making solar panels and dumping all the chemicals in Lake Austin, I'd say that's not a favorable outcome. I believe there are many technologies out there that can do that, and we should be making investments that are proportional to the expected return. And if you look at the expected return, if we actually achieve this, let's say we increase the world GDP by 1%, and we pay for this with taxes. You're talking about trillions of dollars in new tax revenue that would pay for this in just a few years, because energy is so fundamental to the economy. So this actually, it's rational from just even a 5-year payback standpoint to actually spend trillions of dollars investing in any technology that can do this. And so then the question is, are there technologies that can do this? Well, one that I really like is airborne wind, because if you ever look outside at night and you see the clouds whipping by, and they look like they're not that high up, they're not that high up. Sometimes they're just a few hundred feet up. What that is, and you feel calm where you are, what that is, that's called the boundary layer. And it's like a skin around the surface of the earth that kind of shields us from the strong winds. But at some point that breaks away and you have that really fast wind whipping by. And that's what you see with the clouds whipping by. It turns out that, okay, so this is class 5 wind. This is at 400 feet above ground level, so that's a tall wind turbine. And you can see West Texas and all that with class 5 wind out there. If you go up to 2,000 feet up into that boundary layer, the average wind speeds up here are above class 5 in 80% of the northern hemisphere. So we're getting up into way above class 7 wind, which means you can put these turbines close to the cities. Transmission problems aren't as big, for the ground-based wind, it's this kind of corridor from Texas to North Dakota. But if you go up 2,000 feet, it's almost anywhere you can put these things. And so airborne wind looks like one of those technologies that can not only be cheaper, it can be abundant, it deals with transmission problems. It's also less variable as you go up. The wind's a lot more consistent, as you go up higher. So this is just one company that we sponsored with our Green Grant program that I worked with Mitch on, called WindLift. It's developing some of this technology. It's all available today. I mean, you need like flight control systems, you need power converters, you need sensing, and you need aircraft. A lot of the folks are prototyping with these kind of tethered kite type of things. But I think the future is more like Makani Power out in California that's using aircraft that are tethered, because you get super good lift to drag ratios and good aerodynamics. But this can definitely scale to meet many, many times more power than we need. There's no cold fusion leaps of technology required to do this. It's just engineering work. This is one where we need to be investing trillions of dollars to make it happen. And this is a winner. It's totally feasible. And we can do it with control systems that are, that board that I just passed around can fly those things.
Brian, how far are we, Makani or WindLift, in commercializations?
I don't know. I went to a conference a couple of years on this, and I haven't kept as close a touch. But they were doing a megawatt scale turbine with ARPA-E, with some DOE funding. And I haven't. Do you know how that's going?
I don't. I know they got Makani's got a lot of funding.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is definitely one that's a winner. I like John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins, who he's the guy who funded Google, so he's got a pretty good track record. He's really focused on clean tech as a big economic opportunity. Okay, so here's my model that shows electricity and GDP. I'm using this tool called Eureka. It's this really cool tool that actually derives physics-based mass equations. You just feed in raw data, and it'll use this incredible artificial intelligence to figure out what model, what equation, like symbolic equation matches. And one thing you can see just looking at the chart This is world electricity installation, and then this is world GDP. You can see it looks like, what surprised me when I did this chart in my just Excel spreadsheet was I thought the GDP goes up so we use more energy. You know, like the economy's growing so you install more electricity, right? Turns out it's the other way around. You put in more electricity, the economy grows. That's shocking to me. There's a 3.27 year lag. So I put in more energy capacity today, the economy grows faster in 3.27 years because businesses figure out a way to use it. So it actually made sense to me but this really shocked me when I ran this model, and that's what this little artificial intelligence model seemed to suggest too. It found the same correlation. So anyways, it just makes intuitive sense to me that if you have more electricity, you can do more manufacturing, you can run more server farms, you can do more IT, you can do anything. The other thing is that if this is a world at night, so this is light pollution, which is a good measure of electrification. This is population density. You can see that most of the world population doesn't have as much electricity as we do. And there's actually 1 in 4 people don't even have any electricity today that's reliably accessible. So that means 1.6 billion people are not in the economy today. They don't have servers, they don't have computers, they don't have IT, they don't have offices. If you don't have electricity, it's like forget laptop per child. You have no way to power the laptop. And what we can do is we can bring these people onto the grid, make them producers and consumers. I don't think it's necessarily going to be good for the environment because they're going to use a lot more resources, but it's probably a good thing for 1 in 4 people in the world to bring them into the economy. And will the economy grow faster if there's 1.6 billion people that are participants and producers and consumers of goods? I mean, absolutely. So I think this is probably way conservative if you actually make energy cheaper than fossil fuels and make it abundant worldwide. So I think universal electrification worldwide should be a goal of every government because of the benefits to all of us. We got to figure out what to do with the environment if we do that. These people like to eat meat and stuff like that. So how many of you guys would agree with this statement? We shouldn't invest in renewable, let the market decide. I think I've given away my cards. Anybody? So I mean, I always hear like, oh man, Solyndra and all this stuff, it's such a bad market. Well, that's the same thing that happened in the PC industry when it was booming. Is because it's highly volatile, you have oversupply and then undersupply, and you have a lot of bubbles and pops. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad market. It means it's a fast-growing, volatile market. It is tough to be a business, like if you were a Gateway or a Dell back in the day. That was very competitive, and many of the companies didn't survive. And there was a lot of consolidation. But renewable energy, just look at some of the stats here. Solar grew 28 times from 2000 to 2010. Wind, 15 times. Biofuels, 3.6 times. And then the total market to 350 billion. And this is with governments almost doing everything they can to stop it and get in the way. So some of the things I could use some help on is send me, if you have historical price data, and I'll show you some of the data sets that I'll use to do these projections. And if you have mathematical models that work for you in terms of modeling, I'm really interested in that. And I love to collaborate on this and share data. And I was always told as a kid, like, you can't predict technology. It was always like the Thomas Edison model, or the Albert Einstein model, it's the genius. But what I found is that actually the bigger the technology trend, the easier it is to predict and the more predictable it is. It seems to be immune from the economy, from the ups and downs. Like Moore's Law doesn't give a damn what the economy is doing. It just keeps going. So here's a new mantra: think exponentially, act globally. And exponential is this kind of curve, and this is what we're seeing the renewables on, plotted on a linear scale. And the problem with the fossil fuels is you can invest more and more, and you just get diminishing returns. Yes, we can make them cheaper. Yes, we can pull more out, but you get less and less back on your dollar. So even as a private investor, you're going to get a lot more return, and it actually is accelerating return. And as soon as you hit this price point, the whole market flips over. Everything that was against you on the renewables is in your favor. Every country, every citizen is going to want it, and you're going to have the most ginormous market potential that's ever happened in the history of man. So the fossil fuel industry actually should be getting on board, because actually as this happens, they'll be selling more fossil fuels for plastics and all the non-energy things that we use fossil fuels for. It won't decrease the demand for fossil fuels. That's maybe fortunate or unfortunate, but we're going to have the economy growing much faster. And so let me show you some of these exponential trends. Well, first of all, exponential trends, the cool thing about them is that they eventually beat out linear trends and many other trends if you give them enough time. And they tend to sneak up on you. So these are some formulas I use all the time. One of the things you have to be careful is when you go on a Wikipedia and you look up exponential growth, you'll get this formula. This only works for slow rates of growth, like less than 10%. What you actually want to use is these formulas down here with this natural logarithm. And those will work for even like 40, 50% rates of growth. And that's what like Moore's law is on and a lot of these technology trends. And one of the reasons these things take us by surprise is that the faster the growth rate, the harder they are to spot in human terms. So here, Moore's law is about 45, so it's somewhere between this one and this one. And what this is they all end at 100%. Every one of these ends at 100%. And this is the time interval, how long they take to get to 100%. But what changes is the knee of the curve. When does it really, and you can actually plot these on any scale and you'll see that. So what really matters is this growth rate, the compound annual growth rate. That's the interest rate on your loan for technology. And the critical point is really right around, between this, 2 and 20% when these things start to take off. That really is the key thing. And this is one of the reasons these take us by surprise, and I think one of the reasons governments do such a poor job at predicting these things and making incentives. And when I hear people talking about clean energy, they're always talking about it, back here, the way things were in the past when they were more expensive than fossil fuels and all these things. And what we need to be doing is projecting these trends forward and looking what the costs are going to be in the future and what we can expect. That's the same way the PC industry does it. So one of the things you talk about is learning curve. And just one of the fundamental things is that transistors and solar cells are on a steeper learning curve than fossil fuel. So just fundamentally, these are going to win out eventually given enough time. It's really just a question of when that's going to happen. And so a lot of people I talk to says, well, not in my lifetime or not in this century. When I look at the models, I see these things happening a lot faster than people project. And I think a lot of it is kind of this, is that we're thinking linearly back here, and the fossil fuels are up ahead, and these things are really exponential trends. So that's the good news for renewables, is they have a faster learning curve. And just to show you just one example, and if you want to predict the price of solar, you can go back and plot it against production volume. So the x-axis here is annual production in megawatts of solar worldwide. The y-axis is cost per megawatt. And you can see there's a 99.5% R-squared correlation between production volume and cost. So it's not unpredictable at all. You can see there's definitely some ups and downs, and you'll see some bubbles and crashes, and companies' cylinders will go bankrupt when that happens. But it's incredibly predictable. It's not Thomas Edison, it's not Albert Einstein making radical breakthroughs. It's just continuous improvement in processes, and this is the same thing that happens in computing that makes Moore's law so predictable. And this is also a roadmap for investment, for these industries. This is why we got to keep investing. And we understand the Moore's law for computing, and that drove a lot of big investments in private and public sector in that area. But I don't see that happening for clean tech. So that's why I think it's so important to do these kind of models. And I really want to work with you on these and refine them and make them bulletproof and totally solid. So one thing that's interesting is that in 2011 production was 27 gigawatts. That suggests a price per watt of $1.76. So we're actually, what I hear is it's under $1 right now. So we got this huge oversupply, so we're actually ahead of this model. So either that's because of thin film, because this is based on silicon, it's a new technology, or it's just based on oversupply. I think it's primarily just because people ramped up production so fast, and then the economy tanked, and you got oversupply issue. But it's maybe a good thing for driving this trend forward faster, as long as they don't completely go bankrupt. So here's a formula. You dial a cost per watt. And this is, I think, the way government should be making investments. Is what price do we want solar to be? Okay, how much do we need to invest to get there? And let's give industry a solid roadmap for how much solar is going to go on the grid, and forget the subsidies. Just agree to buy it, and we can actually tell you what price it needs to be in 2020 to stay on these curves. And then it's a reasonable price expectation that companies can actually reasonably hit. So here's just some different data sets showing this. Silicon, the thin film thing is here, and that was going to be the big breakthrough. It hasn't taken off as fast as it could. We'll see how that goes. But that comes in at a lower price point than the crystalline silicon. So that could be a nice thing. I think concentrating solar and some of the other things are also interesting to look at. But the inverter is a key part of this, because actually we're at this point where some of the people I talked to, like I was at Arizona State last week, they say the inverter is now as expensive as the PV panels, is this drop in price. So I thought it'd be good to talk about it, and this has become my big focus at National Instruments, because this inverter technology is the key thing in all the clean digital energy systems that shows up there. And I think it's the biggest area where we need to make better tools and make it less expensive for people to design these things. Because it's like the cylinder and piston of the digital energy revolution. It's like the powertrain as the engine literally goes from combustion to being electronic. So this is a power module with IGBTs inside, and there's all this technology, and people are really intimidated by this. But I try to just encourage people not to be intimidated at all. This is really all this thing is. If you can understand this, so this is your power out here, the red terminals. This is your plus supply, this is your ground, and I can either connect plus or ground. And if I flip that switch back and forth just right and run it through a filter, which is like the suspension system on your car, I can get a sine wave out of it. And if I digitally control this thing just right, I can get the sine wave to be aligned with the grid and phase locked. And that's really all an inverter is. And so if you understand this, you understand an inverter. That's all that this digital thing is. It's a power transistor that switches megawatts of power that does the same thing. And it's incredible how small these have gotten. You can get an automotive EV inverter now that's liquid cooled that fits in like a large shoebox. That's 66 horsepower machine. And they just keep getting smaller and more efficient. So, and it doesn't just apply to solar. These apply to wind turbines, motors and drives, electric trains, the UPSs at the server farms, grid storage, hybrid electric vehicles, the smart grid transmission systems that stabilize the power and switch in inductors and capacitors and all that stuff on the grid. So this is the reason I'm so focused on this, is really trying to make a better tool chain to make it really cheap and efficient. So this board here, we can sell it at a cost-effective price for anything that's 50,000 watts or bigger that's grid tied. So people can just buy these instead of spending 2 to 3 years and millions of bucks to develop it. They can just buy it off the shelf and throw them out there on the grid. And if we got it right, it's got all the exact specs that they need. Mitch, how are we doing on time? We're good? Okay. I'm talking really fast, but I had a lot of data I wanted to send you, and I figured that a lot of the discussions can be follow-up. But I want to get the data in front of you. So one of the things you can do, actually, that I was shocked by, this is something I learned recently, you can actually model these things using a power law equation. Based on the size of the inverter, I can tell you how much it is per watt, and I can get this within usually 5 or 10%. So I was visiting a customer in Italy last year, and they said they're doing a 250 kilowatt inverter. They told me the price in euros that they sell it for. I said, are you sure? It should be more like this. And they went back and looked at it, and sure enough, I was within 5% of their selling price. So you can actually model this economy of scale as these inverters get bigger. Like this is the Austin solar farm. They went into 30 megawatt. And this is one of the reasons I'm not a big investor in micro inverters, because the price per watt is so much higher. I think that you see a big trend in the industry towards the big central inverters, and this is one of the reasons. Now maybe somebody will come up with a breakthrough that changes that, but this is the price trend. One of the reasons this is so interesting, why a company like NI would want to get into making inverter control boards, well, one is, if you're Pacific Gas and Electric, and let's just say just 5% of your power goes through inverters today, it's actually more than that, but say it's 5%, that's a $4 million incentive per year to replace those inverters with a new one that's more energy efficient, because they get 6% more efficient per year. And so after 5 years, that's $20 million incentive to replace all your inverters. So that's going to drive a lot of new designs and redesigns and improvements. And that's one of the reasons we put the FPGA technology at the heart of this thing, because it can literally rewire its internal circuitry. So as the smart grid changes, the hardware at a hardware level can rewire itself. And so that's a pretty valuable technology for the smart grid. And you can see a lot of these trends showing. But you can see the biggest growth is in the biggest inverters. And my theory, so I saw that, I couldn't figure out why. My theory is this is why. It's because the bigger the inverter, the cheaper per watt. And I can also use this to figure out how to price my control board. So I know it's going to be a certain percentage of that. And so if they're a 250 kilowatt inverter, they have more budget for it than if they're, this is the average size inverter. This is what sold in 2010, 7.8 kilowatt. And so when you're negotiating on your price for your inverter at home, this is the commercial price. So you know how much margin they have to work with you. But you're only buying one, so it's going to be hard to get that. On average, you'll pay about 56% higher than that. So this is some of the data. So this was the data I got to do that loss analysis. It was just a chart like this. It just showed the losses for this same line of inverters from Fuji from the 80s until present, and I put that on. And what was weird is this doesn't look like a straight line, but you put that on a log scale, it's a straight line. That's the same data here. Now there's a little bit more variation on that. I think these were my smoothed out points. But it's incredible how predictable these things are. So that's why I say in 2020, I think it's going to be 99.5% efficient, which is shocking to me that it could be that high. They're about 98% now, 97 to 99 in that range. And then this is some of the learning curves for logic ICs, the processors. But the power transistors have their own curve. It's not quite as steep, unfortunately, but it's impressive. So you already saw that. So what it looks like to me is that this adoption curve from switching analog to digital controls on these power supplies for the grid is going to happen in this decade. That's what it looks like to me. Is that, you know, what we're doing, like we're putting these systems in at like in Houston at CenterPoint Energy, a different version of this that comes in a metal chassis called Compact Rio, and we're literally replacing a reclosure that's a spinning metal disc that's used to trip the power off when the current goes too high. And they design that disc so that if you get a short burst of high current, it'll trip off. Or if you get a long burst of, of a little bit of current, it'll still trip off. Because what you're trying to do is prevent the lines from catching on fire. So literally, when we first go in there, all this thing does is replicate the spinning metal disc. Your first job is just to make a digital version of the analog thing. The analog mechanical disc called a reclosure, and we put in a smart reclosure. And then we can start applying all this fancy software to do more advanced things. Because certainly with the kind of computing we can do on this, we can do a better job of protecting the power grid and stopping fires and telling the utility, hey, guess what? That was probably a squirrel that unfortunately got killed. Or a line is down on the ground because the impedance went to ground. Now this thing can do all kinds of analysis on board that spinning metal disc can't. The thing is, from all the analysis I've done, it's got to be price comparable to the analog version it's replacing, which is surprising. I would have thought that this is so much better that people would be willing to pay more. But surprisingly, it appears that it's only when it hits the same price point that the market explodes. So I try to look for these, like these knee of these adoption curves, that 20% point adoption on that exponential curve. That's when the winners and losers are usually decided. And this is why Facebook has like a quarter of the internet population, is that they had such a fast adoption, and you've got to get in the market before that curve happens. It starts to become very bloody red ocean. Try to compete with Facebook now. It would have been a lot easier 10 years ago before they had over 20% of the internet using Facebook. So this is something I think really to study for any clean tech company, is to try and figure out when are these adoption curves going to happen. And it seems to be a paradigm shift. And let me just show you, I think I meant to have this slide a little bit earlier, but I want to show you the big mother of all trends. This is just to make the point of this paradigm shift. This is Moore's Law. So this is my own model. There's this guy named Hans Moravec that has got all these data points going back to the 1890s for computers. And what's crazy about this is, so this blue is my curve fit that I did to the data. The red are the data points I used for the curve fit. So I used 1946 to 2009 to do my curve fit. What's funny is it seems to go back in time, back to 1910. So that's always a good test for a model. Can it predict out of set data? If you give it a certain data set, it's going to fit the set, right? But can it predict outside? And then what's also cool, I was happy to see this. So the FPGA that's on here is right at the top of this curve, 280 million calculations per dollar on this thing. And that's insane, because this is when I was born, back here, 15 bucks for one calculation per second on your computer. But what's really, really surprising, okay, this had nothing to do with the transistor. This was a mechanical gear calculator. And actually, somebody designed this like 1,000 years before that, but they never built it. And it would have been so expensive to build. They never got funding. And then this is the hard drive, the power supply, the memory, and the display. Back in 1953, this is vacuum tubes. This is also still pre-transistor, right there on the curve, right? Okay, the discrete transistors, okay, before we had integrated circuits, right there on the curve. The Cray 1, oh, now we can put all those transistors on one chip. We can integrate them more. Okay, Commodore 64, This is an awesome computer. It actually sold more units than I think any other machine to date of a single model. The risk, and what you'll see now is there's this trend towards massive parallelism, because the performance per core is kind of slowing down a little bit. Or it's not that it's slowing down, but it's just not going to keep us on this kind of rate of improvement. And so what we see is like this thing actually, inside this chip, there's 58 little digital signal processors inside that FPGA chip. And the new ones coming out have 1,500 inside. And so in my opinion, these FPGAs, because they're able to go massively parallel and scale up, they're going to be more and more important. In fact, they may take over this curve, which would be really interesting if that does happen. So what the heck is an FPGA? Let me see if I've got a chart that tells you what an FPGA is. Do a Control F here. Mitch, how are we on time?
Do we have the one? Clay? Let's go to one. Yeah, we're good. Please ask questions as we're going here, guys.
Yeah. All right, well, coming up after, I'll tell you what FPGA is. But it's a new kind of chip that's invented in the 80s, and I think it's going to be important. Okay, so one of the things that happens in all these technology paradigm shifts is things go from more and more discrete and individual components that you have to assemble manually as a company to being more modules that are packaged and kind of have all that functionality in a set. So this thing has a bunch of these IGBT transistors inside it that are like those valves that I showed you, with the thing that controls the valve called the gate driver. That's what turns it on and off. And then these get integrated into these intelligent power modules and power stacks. And now what we're doing is we have a consortium where we're putting this into a stack with basically a whole little subsection or module for a 100 kilowatt inverter with the control board and everything integrated. And then you build a big megawatt inverter like this, using these stacks. So in this cabinet there'd be 10 or 15 of these stacks inside there. And so this is the natural progression of technology, is from being more and more build it yourself to more and more modular. And this is one of the things that National Instruments is always fighting this battle to convince people, to go up and use more modularity and more off the shelf, because you shouldn't be inventing this at this level anymore. But people are taught, unfortunately, in school in the US to do this and not to do this. But that's peril, I think, for a lot of clean tech startups, is if you can just buy this, there's been $2 million to $5 million worth of R&D that went into designing that, or you can spend that R&D yourself. I would buy it, but we'll see. Tesla Motors, their whole philosophy is to do it from scratch in-house, rather than buying off the shelf. But I think what we have the chance to do here is kind of do for digital energy what the PC did for the desktop, meaning standard modular building bricks like Legos that everybody can put together. And my girlfriend's dad put together a PC a few months ago from parts, and he's a physics teacher, and he was able to do that without having a PhD in computer science. So it means you got to have standard architectures, modular building bricks. It's got to be software defined, not hardware defined, and field programmable really helps. And really, the software is the inverter. So that's kind of the heart of this stuff. It's a software problem. This is what we've got to make happen. So we can't be working at this level. We need to be working, more at the software level. And that's the motivation behind this product. So hopefully that gives you a feel for what NI does in this. Let's take a look at some battery technology. One of the things that blew my mind, and I'd love to have some more data sets on this if you could help me. If anybody has data on ultracapacitors, the data set I have for that is just off the charts in terms of the improvement. 45,000 times more energy per dollar. So ultracaps are really good for giving short bursts of power, but they don't have as much kilowatt hours. The total energy stored is lower. Whereas batteries, these are high power lithium ion batteries over here. They have a lot of power. They can put out a lot of power, but they also have a lot of energy stored. So they can take you down the road a long number of miles, as well as give you lots of instantaneous torque. Whereas ultracaps are like instantaneous torque, but not a lot of miles. But what's interesting is how much cheaper the ultracaps are going to be. And one of the problems with batteries is they're slow to charge. So they're much faster to discharge than charge. So if you pair up ultracaps, so this is a project at University of Toronto that's using this system to make an electric vehicle that combines ultracaps and batteries together. and then it takes the benefits of both. So this may be a big game changer for electric vehicles, because if these things are really going to be this cheap, I can have lots and lots of ultra caps inside the car, and then I get just insane torque, just off the charts torque. And when I hit the brakes, that energy goes into the ultra caps and then slowly trickles into the batteries at their slower rate. So you can actually baby the batteries and make them last longer and not heat them up and cool them down. So this is very complementary to bring these two together. So here's my models for ultra capacitor price performance. So what's crazy is like they're basically free in 2040 or less than a penny in 2020 for a farad. So an electric car might use like 10,000 farads today. So that'll be like 40 cents in 2020. So I want some more. This is based on this data from this manufacturer for what they sell their ultra caps. These 2,700 microfarad ultra caps. So if you can get me more data on that, please send it to me. Lithium-ion batteries, I get pretty wide range on these, but this is what I wanted to figure out. When would an electric car be cheaper than a gas car? So my Leaf has 24 kilowatt hours, and they say it's 100-mile range. It's really more like a 70-mile range the way I drive. It's 75 miles an hour on I-35 and 183. So to get a 300-mile range, I'm going to say that's going to be 100 kilowatts. And so you can see why the electric cars didn't take off until recently. In 2010, that hit about $12,000 for those batteries. People will say, well, aren't you worried about the batteries going bad? Well, they have an 8-year warranty, and by the time the warranty runs out, I can buy the same amount of batteries for $2,400. So no, I'm not worried about the batteries. And I'll be able to get a 100-mile range for less than the same price. So if anything, I'll upgrade. If I still want to drive the car, I'd upgrade the battery pack and get myself a 300-mile range. But what I really want to do is this project where we have a stick shift and a clutch, and we make a digital car where it's like a different car every day. So it's like, there's no reason it needs to be like a record player, right? They're trying to make my Nissan Leaf drive like a gas car. Why is it? It's a digital car. I can give it any personality I want. So if you're interested in working on this, I'm going to try and get some funding and we'll build this for next NI Week. It'll be a digital car, like an MP3 player. You can drive a different car every single day. So if you want to drive the crappy 80s Lamborghini, which I think of that one because I don't know much about cars, but I've been told that's actually drove like a dog. I mean the DeLorean in Back to the Future. That's what I'm thinking of. But you can drive a different car every day, and as you're driving, you can change the torque speed curve for every gear, and so I mean this is digital, right? That's what you can do. Sound effects. You have a graphic equalizer. Nobody's going to want to drive a gas car anymore because the electric car is going to be so much cooler. So I want to build one that just shows what we can do with ultra caps and batteries and all of that. So I think the tipping point is, for me, I think is when you can buy a 300-mile range and it's less expensive than a gas car. I think that's when most people will say, yeah, the 300 is enough for a lot. And so that's probably 2018 to 2020 as a conservative date. So if I was going to think when is the electric vehicle market going to bubble and explode, it'd be somewhere in that range. I made this little widget on Wolfram Alpha, and you can type in any. This is like a stock index that tells you how much cheaper it is to drive an electric car. So back in 1995, it was like 3 times cheaper, and earlier this year it was like 6.75 times cheaper per mile. That's just based on the average electricity price in the country and the average gas price in the country. So it costs you more to buy an electric car, but they're a lot cheaper to drive, even today. So as soon as they become cheaper to buy and cheaper to drive, I don't see why. And they're going to be MP3 player, the graphic equalizer for the driving, and you'll have sound effects when you hit the gas pedal, and it'll have a bass cannon in the back. So, you can make it sound and feel and shake like any car ever made in the world. And we got peak oil. This looks like a crash to me. And you see anything that's super exponential, when it's faster than, if you put this on a log scale, it's faster than a straight line. That's the #1 hallmark of a bubble that's going to crash. So I'd love to work with some people and do some models on this and try and figure out when does the oil bubble actually pop. Because the Sornet and some of those guys have ways to model that stuff.
Going back to the last slide there with the cars, so we were talking about how electric cars are cheaper to run compared to gasoline cars. Do you also take into consideration the improvements that you're seeing, gasoline cars that are manufactured doing stuff with existing technologies to improve their?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the fossil fuels, I mean, there's more, unfortunately, there's a ton more R&D dollars spent on fossil fuel technology than clean energy technology, and actually more direct dollar subsidies. for them too from the government, and just in terms of cash credits and things. But and they do progress. But I guess my point on that was going back to that slide that showed diminishing returns, is that you have a lot less room to improve, whereas the renewables and the digital technologies have like tremendous, like the airborne wind turbines. Even the estimates today is that they might be 10 times cheaper than a conventional ground-based turbine. They need to go through a lot of proving to make them reliable and all of that, but fundamentally the math is much more favorable for them than. That's the fundamental thing, is I think the rate of improvement for the fossil fuels are going to be slower than the renewables and the digital. So eventually the renewables and digital are going to take over. And that's why I like to spend more time on doing these kind of models and try to figure out when do those points happen and can we influence that. Because like in the solar case, you can see it. You dial in the price you want for solar. There's a 99.5% correlation with production volume. So if all the world governments just said, we're going to buy this much solar, I could tell you exactly what the price is going to be. And actually, we've been beating that because companies still innovate on top of that. So if anything, the technologies seem to get better, And so you can argue that, but I think on the net, the rate of or the slope of the improvement of anything based on a transistor, which is the renewable stuff, is going to outpace anything based on a combustion engine or hydraulics, or those older technologies. Anything where you're boiling water to make steam, I don't think it's going to be a much harder problem to innovate at a rate that can outcompete the new stuff. So that's that learning curve slide, and showing that the silicon-based stuff is on a faster learning curve. But I think the real kicker is you got to make it a software problem. You got to make it simulated. You got to model it. Like, we don't have models for our grid today, and so these same FPGA devices are what's going to help us do those models, because they're like little supercomputers and they're really fast. And so we're doing big investments in that, so that we can actually, model our power grid. And so that's a big issue, because if you can't mathematically describe the problem, you can't compute it, and if you can't compute it, then it's on a very slow rate of improvement. And there's probably better models for the gas car today than there are for the electric car. So it has an advantage from that standpoint. So somebody disagree with me? I've been standing up here and preaching technology.
Generally, when people try to get, there are opposing forces around the question: do we try to get to higher levels of integration versus go down on the stack to produce things?
Yeah.
I've been involved with technology stuff since the 70s.
Yeah.
The manufacturers and vendors of equipment rarely find it to be in their interest to go with non-proprietary, group open type solutions that have lots of modular stuff.
Yeah.
You and I would definitely find it to be that way, because that's what you're selling. But when it comes to manufacturers of turbines or manufacturers of inverters or whatever else, people want to have as much proprietary, specific, their own stuff as possible.
Yeah.
That's why you see standards for some things, but definitely not for everything.
Yeah.
So these are kind of countervailing forces from the technology strategy point of view at businesses. I'm sure you deal with that when you go make sales calls.
Oh, definitely, yeah. In National Instruments, we're an engineering tools provider, so it's in our interest to have standards and for things to be more compatible, because then we can just make like LabVIEW, our software tools,
but then the
compatible with
that.
that.
Selling to says, why should I bother helping you enable my future competitors?
Yeah, I say because I'm going to do it anyways. So, and I'll sell this to them, even if you don't adopt it. I'll sell this to them, and they can do something with $950,000 less engineering cost than if you design this from scratch and make it proprietary.
And some entities will find that to be attractive, and some won't.
Yeah, but I think part of what we need to do as a tools provider is make it so that you can do that proprietary special sauce as a software thing, and that it's not the hardware design of this board that's so proprietary. Because all I did is I went around and visited 20, 30 companies and national labs and stuff and said, what do you guys do when you design this from scratch? And said, could I make a standard module that does the same thing? And the hardware standpoint, that's easy. So what they want to protect, what I'd like to push it to is what you want to protect is the software that runs on this. And I will give you a tool chain helps you make this most crazy innovative software that solves all these problems with the smart grid and clean tech, and your inverter never fails, and it does all these great things. And our job is to let you have the software tools to do that, and then you can lock it down and keep it top secret so people can't rip it off here and reverse engineer it. So that's the way I'd like to think about it from the NI perspective is, can we give you tools that help you do that proprietary stuff and focus 90% of your engineering effort on that rather than reinventing the wheel kind of stuff, the less productivity stuff, and then really help you lock that IP in there and keep it secret. But yeah, that's, you look at industrial automation, and I worked in that industry for long, and they talk about, the PLCs that control the factories and stuff like that, and the communication protocols. And then the reality is that they're not compatible at all with each other, and the vendors don't want them to be. It's exactly what you're saying. So I think, we shouldn't let that happen to energy. We shouldn't let that happen to the smart grid, because that will be the natural propensity is, I'll make it proprietary and it won't talk to anybody else's smart grid equipment, and that's going to be a nightmare.
Other questions?
Evolution of technology, do you see it becoming, I guess, more less susceptible to quality issues and more reliable? That seems to be a big thing now when you're looking at life events. But do you see any changes to that occurring with this new technology?
Well, yeah, I think that. Let me go back to the very first slide. That's a big challenge. Because the complexity is increasing constantly, and it's increasing almost exponentially too. So the design engineer's job gets more complicated. So the design tools, need to help them do that. So the big thing I think that really helps there is what we're doing is we're building these real-time simulators. So I can take the control board that's going to go on the smart grid and connect it to a virtual grid or a virtual electric vehicle. And actually, we're building one in South Carolina. It'll be 15 megawatt grid simulator. So I can make a virtual motor like this, or I can make a virtual grid, I can make a virtual inverter. Anything can be real and anything can be simulated, and it's at full power levels. Because some of this stuff, if you're just testing at a 5 volt level, you won't see all the issues with noise and switching and electromagnetics and stuff like that, that if you're doing it at the full power level. So these real-time simulators, I think, are key for that, because this has been standard practice. And you don't fly an aircraft without doing this kind of what's called real-time HIL simulation, because you want to rigorously take it through every possible thing that can go wrong and make sure the control system doesn't do something bad, crash the plane. And this hasn't existed in the past, because to run these simulations, processors still are not fast enough to do that today, because of the time it takes to get a signal from the input pin into the processing and back. So one of the only devices that can do that today is these FPGAs, which now have these little computers built into the chip. And so we're putting a big R&D into enabling you to put these simulations on these FPGAs, which is mathematically a hard thing to do. So there's been real obstacles to doing the same kind of validation and verification that's standard practice when you make an engine control system, on the power grid stuff. And if your test of your product is to put it on the grid and see if it blows up, or you can only test it in the lab, but that's not realistic to what all the weird thing that's going to happen when it's out on the grid. That's a real problem. So it's not, it's still a very hard problem to make systems reliable, but we can learn a lot from the automotive and aerospace industries on how to do that.
I wonder, you see a lot of pressure, or a lot of looking at it, solar getting to a 25-year life of the components, inverter, the panels, and everything. If we really look, 25 years from now, is it going to even be relevant? I mean, when is that technology going to make that obsolete, and really should they be looking at life based on really when the technology will be coming in that obsolete was there?
Yeah, I think we should be designing the systems to be a lot more software based, a lot less hardware based. Is if you can convert to digital as fast as possible and then deal with it as a digital signal processing project rather than analog or mechanical, then that helps that system update and upgrade, a lot better. But the thing is, solar, like the PV panels last 20, 30 years. In 20 years, they're still putting out 80% of the power. But the inverter transistors don't last that long. They're lasting 5 to 10 years. And so we're trying to make the IP tools and software tools so you can design this thing to really baby those transistors, so they ideally will last a lot longer. So if we could get to 20 years, and the capacitors fail and stuff like that because they have electrolyte in there and that dries up. So you got to take a system level view of the whole problem and look at all the failure modes, and so in my opinion, you can't be working at the transistor level anymore. You need to be looking at the system level because you have all these conflicting trade-offs. Like if you make it, this component lasts longer, it might cost more. And so there's all these pressures. It's a really hard problem to solve. And it's a big optimization problem where everything has trade-offs. So that's one of the reasons these simulators help so much, because you can look at all those weird nonlinear trade-offs and literally just run a math algorithm to evolve the design to find the optimum thing that works the best. But you got to factor cost in, reliability, lifetime, efficiency. And this is a tough design problem. But so is designing a combustion gas car. It's really tough.
On the from the critical infrastructure viewpoint, there are supposed to be 16 critical infrastructures in the United States from an intelligence standpoint, and the other 15 run on electricity. With having a standardized communication protocol and modular open source type of platform, what are the vulnerability aspects of that for having a grid that essentially is open source?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think makes sense is to separate the security layer from the embedded control layer. Like this is the embedded controller. I think you want to have a separate security box in front of that can be updated independently on its own, because that needs firmware updates like your McAfee virus scan like every day to keep it protected. But at least so far with online banking and all this stuff, we've been able to stay ahead of it. But the existing infrastructure is designed like a Christmas tree light. You pop one bulb, the entire grid goes down. So nothing could be more vulnerable than what we have today. And there's the utility industry was incentivized by the government to be very low risk. But the problem is the same thing with these financial crashes is we don't see the systematic risk of the whole system. And the grid today you can take out with a high power rifle. You don't need and you can take the whole country down. So you don't. So I think yes, there's security issues, but I think we can look to the banking industry and the financial sector for how to deal with these fast changing things that require security to do transactions. And it's crazy today that we have to vote on paper, that I can't just, or even have to go into a voting booth, that I can't just go online. If it was that easy for somebody to hack, money out of my account, then I shouldn't be doing any online banking. I don't know why I can't vote online. But yeah, that's a big issue. But I think what people are missing is that there's a much bigger risk of not updating. That most of that infrastructure was designed 1880s, and by 1950, 90% of the U.S. population had electricity. And a lot of that, the way our grid was designed was we didn't understand the internet, we didn't understand transistors, we didn't understand how to make a robust, reliable system. I think we know a lot more about how to do that today. And so you need to design the grid so no matter what happens at a local level, it doesn't go down. Each one of these has enough intelligence to keep your neighborhood running, even if the rest of the grid goes down. That's how the internet's designed, for the most part. You try and minimize the vulnerabilities.
One last question, Rusty.
So, this is pretty abstract, and I apologize for that, but, one thing that worries grid planners and electrical engineers is coronal mass ejection. Massive coronal mass ejection could conceivably knock the world grid out.
Yeah.
Lickety split. Can you envision any kind of incorporated or embedded algorithms in this digitized thing that could better protect the grid from high voltage surges?
Absolutely. You can using these tools, you can design these things to be robust. The way you design an aircraft is you look at all the possible failure modes and you design the software to be fault tolerant and have multiple backups. And yes, you can crash an aircraft and you can take it down, and that does happen, but it's extremely reliable, and the way things are designed today are not that way. It's a mechanical spinning disc that trips off the current, and you have to manually have a guy go out there and use a pole to turn it back on. So absolutely, yeah, and we're gonna, like next year is a peak of sunspot activity. I think there's there's the concerns about the security that are holding up some of this stuff. That the much bigger risk is just not changing, because most cities is like three-day food supply. So if you take down the grid nationwide, it's 1850s. In the U.S. and 2 weeks later, we're all back to living in burning dung or something. I don't know what we're going to do.
On that note.
That's a perfect way to end.
Nice round of applause to Brian. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for coming. December 11th, we'll have Mark Strama here. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, everyone.